Hey there, it's Dan and you're watching The Salty Sea. With the Grand Alliance books coming out soon and promising changes for nearly every faction, right now isn't the best time for tactical deep dives on a faction, but it is the perfect time to take stock on where the game is sitting currently. So let's take a look at the best units in Warcry, starting with the cheap ones, the Featherweight division. Now, why start with these ones? Well, we were always going to start at the top or the bottom, so with the rules as they are right now in the above ground version of the game, chaff is king. The more folks you've got, the better off you're going to be. Now, catacombs might change that a little bit, with doorways letting mid-size units block the path without getting surrounded. But range 2 and high movement on tons of different cheap units is going to make a real difference against those door blockers. So I've weighted them pretty highly here. Now the rules for this. This is Warcry. We're all fighting in the 8 points here. So no top 10s, no top 5s. We're looking for the top 8 units, under 80 points. Now, with how we grade them, cheap small units get used in two ways. You either mass a ton of them, or you use one or two to finish off a list. And both ways are totally valid for the purpose of what I'm doing here. And then another note is when we talk about damage or durability, we're talking point for point here. Is 10 of them like putting your opponent in a blender? Does it make a wall around the objectives that they can't possibly chew through? Or is it that when they kill one, they've essentially accomplished nothing because you spent so few points on it? Also, abilities matter a lot less for cheap units until they matter a ton. Now that's a little confusing, so let's just say that little units are, well, little. So damage buff abilities do a lot less for them. However, support abilities work really well on cheap units because you can put multiple sources of the spell on the field, or you can just force your opponent to prioritize killing an otherwise low-value target. And finally, no Noblars allowed. That's right, I'm very prejudiced against Noblars. Listen, if a cheap chaff unit is completely against the spirit of its warband, it is disqualified. Don't bring your Thunderfist, Glutton, 12 Noblar warband to a game and tell me you're actually playing Ogre tribes. By the way, Noblars are really good, and they might actually crack this list if they were allowed. The 12 Noblar mod tribes list is a real beating. Now, I wanted to add a few more honorable mentions than normal here because the Featherweight category has so many of the best units in the game. Line up the top 25 units in Warcry and probably 10 of them would come from this division. So let's start by looking at two of the best move 3 units in the whole game. The first is Plague Bearers. They have really standout damage for their price. They only cost 50, and they do more damage than any unit under 65. Also, they have 10 hit points, which, at this price, lets you put a wall of pus on the board that some opponents just can't chew through. Move 3 is a terrible handicap, but if your opponent has to come to you, then Plague Bearers are just going to be incredible in a fight. Then you just have the basic Arcanaut company. They have excellent durability and just a ton of DACA. You can flood the board and do a ton of damage without getting into the fight. It does take some finesse, however, to get in range, since they only shoot 8 inches, and make the good numbers matter, since they're too slow to play objectives and shoot at the same time. Now I also want to highlight two other units. One is the Demonette. They have move 5 and great damage. They're one of the only units in the game that has a damage buffing double ability that's way better than Onslaught. That's very rare. Then also Marauders with flails are excellent. They're an incredibly flexible unit. They have solid durability, respectable damage at their cost, and range 3, which lets you do to range 2 units what range 2 units get to do to everyone else. They have everything except mobility. They're the perfect unit to outmaneuver your opponents, if you don't mind move 4. Now to jump into the real list. We're going to start with Twinsies. Yeah, they're 2 units with the exact same stat line. The Corvus Cabalite with Spear, and the Daughters of Cain, Sister of Slaughter with the Whip and the Knife. They both have movement 5 and range 2, and both of these units excel at outmaneuvering your opponents. All that would be nice, but nothing special except they have 9.2 damage efficiency, which is amazing. Range 2 is always nice, but the value increases exponentially with high damage units, because attacking someone at range 2 means that they don't have to waste a disengage if they would rather just go somewhere else. Now, that means it's a lot more potent on an actual threat where they can't afford to ignore you. And both of these units manage to be an excellent threat, even at a low points cost of 75 points. Now, Corvus Cabal do just barely get the edge here because they have a slightly better ability. Sister of Slaughter gets access to an onslaught with a tiny bit higher damage against toughness 4 and 3 units, but the Cabalite gets a ranged damage spell that, sure, it's not as good as Onslaught, but it has a totally different use, which just gives the Cabalist a little bit more flexibility, which is really nice here. Regardless, both of them, with their mobility and damage output, are just the perfect backbone for a warband. Yes, they're a little fragile, but your movement and your range let you dictate the fights and mitigate some of the fragility. With 6 of these in a warband, you can spend the other 550 on whatever you want, and you're going to have a competitive list. So why aren't they higher? Well, there is one other unit that pulls off the exact same job as these, and it's freaky good. So let's keep counting down. 6 and 5. Listen, I go back and forth on which one of the next 2 units is actually better. In fact, every unit from here until we get to the top 2 is going to be pretty debatable which one should be above the others. But one thing's for certain, abilities that give you a free disengage are really good. Both Skinks and Plague Monks can do it, and it's incredibly powerful. You can retreat out of your opponent's range and then smack them, or you can just use your opponents as a waypost to get a free 3 inches added to your movement. The way it adds to your actions is basically like having half an onslaught, but at a double. So let's go into Skinks. You can mass them for a wall of shots, or you can just have 1 or 2 in your list just to finish off wounded opponents, and that adds some really nice flexibility to list writing. They have 18-inch threat range, so 6-inch movement plus range 12 means that your opponents just can't hide from them. So blood-marked mission or treasure missions, opponents with important glass cannon units, Skinks are incredible in all of those situations. They're also a really hard counter to number 4 on this list, if you're counting. Now, from standing still to flying around the board, move 6 plus disengage is just so good, and so now we get into Plague Monks with staves. They have great damage output, almost as good as the 2 previous ones, who, the Cabalist and the Sister of Slaughter. They do the same role as Plague Monks, but Plague Monks do it just the tiniest bit better. Because again, great damage output, almost as good as them, with range 2 and 1 better mobility at move 6. Plus, they're 5 points cheaper, which at this low cost really does make a difference and make it easier to mass them. So then you can move 6 inches up to attack a unit from 2 inches away. They waste an activation to get in range to attack you. And then next round you get a bonus disengage to then get back out of range and hit them twice, which just means that a Plague Monk will just destroy equally powerful units that don't have that disengage to play with and to get extra activations with. So now we get into the very best units in the game, the top 4. And I'm going to start with the Serpent out of Splintered Fang. So if I just said Skinks are a hard counter to these, what gives? How are these ones number 4? Well, they are flat out the highest damage unit in the game. Now, I am saying point for point, but that's still very important. Damage efficiency of 13.3 is incredible. And yes, the tank score is low, but with 8 HP, only elites are really going to take these out in 1 attack. And then if they don't get taken out in 1 attack, you get to attack back, doing 5 damage per swing against toughness 3, and a little more than 4 against toughness 4. Plus, look at that move 6. You can go put this crazy snake anywhere you want to on the board in terms of outmaneuvering your opponents to make sure that you get your damage in before it gets taken out. Splintered Fang even has a buddy who can let them attack a second time. Now, that ability isn't quite as ridiculous as it is on the Rocktusk Prowler for Untamed Beasts, because these are smaller than the Prowler, but it's still pretty darn good. Now, Splintered Fang only comes with one Serpent, possibly because they knew including more would unbalance the existing Chaos Warbands, but you don't have to stick with that. You can mass them if you want to. Otherwise, though, this is also a great unit for just having one or two to just kind of hide in your list, protect, and then explode damage out for just such a low investment of 65 points. You know, seriously, these are doing damage that you're usually looking at sort of 130, 150 point models are doing similar damage to Serpents. So to have it for just 65 is amazing. Now, the model is kind of a problem. I don't like it at all just because it's just so simple. It's very uggo, so just go ahead and convert your own, really, from anything, especially since they only give you one. Mold it out of green stuff if you have to. Just don't trick yourself into buying multiple Splintered Fang kits just to get the 4 or 5 Serpents you'll want for the best builds. Now to get into number 3, which is Netters from Gloomspite kits. I honestly think this might be the best move 4 unit in the game. It's got great stats to be reasonable for offense and defense. Now, I know 8 HP isn't a lot, but how is your opponent putting out the raw damage it takes to kill these en masse, right? Think about 10 Netters for 450 points. Telling your opponent that they have to deal with 80 HP, and, you know, when it's so cheap, any kind of damage that they've done above the 8 is just wasted, and a lot of warbands just won't be able to chew through all these. Then, you know, 2 damage to other toughness 3 units isn't much, but when you have 10 of these on the board, that really adds up. 45 points really just lets you dominate the activation wars. And these Netters even get to do a job beyond just their bodies. Otherwise, I wouldn't be putting them on this list. The ability is incredibly important, so remember when I said abilities don't matter until they do? This is the best example of that. So how good is it really? Well, a 66% chance to paralyze a unit isn't guaranteed, but it is very effective and a great threat to have. Remember, you can have 2 of these in every deployment zone, and it barely costs you a quarter of the points in your warband to do so. So let's say you go first. No matter where your opponent's most valuable unit is, chances are you'll have a netter who can roll for a 66% chance to lock it down for this whole round. You know, you'll feel fine moving 8 inches with a netter to try to do that. Now, if they go first, okay, they get to use their MVP, but you still get to go and lock down their second best unit. Then all your other netters still get to do tons of other stuff. Think about how much value that is point for point when your 45-point unit neutralizes their 250-point unit for just a double. The only thing that stops netters from getting into the top 2 conversation is being weak to warbands that get a lot of their damage out of sort of their semi-chaff mobile units. So we're talking about Demonettes, Corvus Cabal, Sisters of Slaughter out of Daughters of Cain, or the Plague Monks out of Skaven, which, funnily enough, is half this list. But, you know, most warbands aren't relying on their chaff for their damage. So now we're in the top 2. And I honestly think these 2 units might just be head and shoulders better than any other unit in the game in any other size division. So let's get into Giant Rats. This is just a stupidly undercosted unit. It's the cheapest unit in the game, and in my opinion, the second best unit in the game. Now, people talk a little bit about the synergy where Packmasters let them attack again, and that's relevant. So one Packmaster can be fine, but really don't get distracted trying to combo. Giant Rats aren't special because one of them does 2 or 3 damage. They're special because 10 of them do 25 damage and cost barely over a third of your list. They've only got 4 HP though, so that means they're really fragile, right? Wrong. Think about when you're focus firing down a medium or a big unit. Every point of damage goes towards killing something. when you need to do 4 damage here, 4 damage there, you waste a lot of damage in overkill. So 5 rats might have 20 HP, but you'll probably need to throw out 25 or more damage to take them down. Now, my scoring system, tank score, kind of stops working for that under 5 HP, but with how good giant rats are, I'm confident that GW's algorithm for creating points also stops working at such a low point value. Seriously, these should not cost only 35. You also might have noticed that Skaven have 2 units on this list. In my opinion, that's why Skaven are just the best competitive warband in the game. Not that you should only ever play Skaven, but just be aware that a list with, say, 6 giant rats and 5 plague monks with staves as the backbone is almost assuredly going to rip through almost every warband that your friends put out there. Now, that's not to say Skaven is unbeatable. There's ways to attack them, but just not many. So if these are the most used unit in the best warband in the game, shouldn't they be the #1 unit? Well, maybe, and I'm sure a lot of other people would put them there. And I can neither confirm nor deny that they lost points due to being so ugly. Seriously, why has Warcry been saddled with giving great rules to some of the ugliest models in the game? But otherwise, listen, our top unit really is the best in the game. It's just not #1's fault that it has to be on the same team with a bunch of crappy Stormcast. That's right, #1 is Aetherwing Kale, or Aetherwings. Seriously, do you know how hard it is to find art for Warhammer Aetherwings when League of Legends exists? Anyway, 45 points, move 12. Again, in some ways that's all you need to know, so let me read it again. 45 points with movement 12. Listen, their combat stats aren't impressive, but in this case, it doesn't really matter. To bring it home, let's go over the types of missions and explain why Aetherwings are just so good at just winning games. First, there's objective missions. Any mission where, at the start of the game you place objectives and then you start playing. Every single Aetherwing in play is on the objective by round 1, or whenever it drops down, say if the hammer or shield don't come in round 1. That means that you are outnumbering your opponent and scoring on that objective from the very first round, almost no matter what they do, which is excellent. Now think about treasure missions. An Aetherwing can grab the treasure and have it deep in your deployment zone immediately. Then your flood of other Aetherwings can body block. You also have hunter-killer missions where you have to kill one of their units and they have to kill one of yours. Well, good luck catching 2 different Aetherwings that are on opposite sides of the board, while the actual damage portion of your army, which are usually going to be 2 ranged shooters, are just machine gunning down your important units while your Aetherwings run away. Aetherwings just let you decide when and where the action is going to happen, and they do it for so cheap. So yeah, can't the big mobile leaders like a FEC Crypt Infernal or a Gitz Hopper Boss, or one of many of the other sort of dragons in the game, do some of this stuff, but with a lot more excitement? Yes, they can, but 45 points means that you can flood the board with units who all get to dictate positioning to your opponents. You can fly the entire length of the board to go tie up the opposing leader so it can't hurt your important units, and that's with just a 45-point throwaway unit that you don't care if it dies. Throw one of these away at it every round for the whole match, and you're still barely using much of your warband. They also have a nice little ability that makes Long Strike Raptors, one of the worst units in the game, actually playable. Don't they get extra points for doing something like that? So there you have it. The 8 best featherweights in Warcry, with the little birds getting the championship belt. You know I had to put the bird #1 with a name like that, right? Anyway, if you've come down this far, please tap the like button down below. It can be our offering to Algorithmo, the chaos god of YouTube. Or, let me know if you think I missed anything in the comments. Heck, last month I spent a whole 20-minute video telling you how Blood Reavers were amazing and the best reason to pick up Khorne. Then I didn't even give them an honorable mention in this one. After all, it's not their fault that so many of the other best units in the game are also in this division. I'll be back with more Warcry content soon, though with the Grand Alliance books promising to turn half the factions on their heads, it may be a while before I get to any single warband tactical deep dives, so I might do some more generalized tactical fun stuff like this one. Until then, may all your rolls be crits.